The iron shackles had rubbed her wrists raw, and when the cowboy cut through them with a single stroke of his blade, Natalie Reynolds expected questions, gratitude, conversation, something. But he simply tipped his hat once and rode away into the sage-dotted hills of Wyoming territory without saying a single word. It was June of 1878, and Natalie had been traveling with a freight wagon from Salt Lake City to Evanston, Wyoming, where her uncle operated a general store and had promised her work after her father's death left her with nothing in Missouri. The outlaws had appeared like ghosts from behind a rocky outcrop, 3 men with faces hidden behind dusty bandanas who shot the wagon driver before Natalie could even scream. They had taken her, bound her hands, and dragged her to a decrepit cabin tucked in a valley she could not name. For 2 days, they kept her there while they argued about ransom and other dark possibilities that made her blood run cold. She had prayed harder than she ever had in her 21 years, her lips moving soundlessly in that dim cabin while the men drank whiskey and played cards and occasionally looked at her with eyes that promised nothing good. Then he came. She had not heard his approach. One moment the outlaws were laughing over some crude joke, and the next the door burst inward, and gunfire exploded through the small space. Natalie had pressed herself against the far wall, her bound hands covering her ears as the violence erupted. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the outlaws lay dead and the third had fled through a back window. The cowboy stood in the doorway, a tall silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun, his revolver still drawn. He had moved toward her with purpose, his boots heavy on the rough wooden floor. She had gotten her first clear look at him then. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and unreadable. He wore the practical clothing of a working ranch hand, worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A revolver sat on each hip, and a rifle was slung across his back. Without a word, he had pulled a knife from his belt and cut her bonds. His hands were careful, never touching her skin, efficient in their work. When the ropes fell away, Natalie had rubbed her raw wrists and looked up at him, her mouth opening to speak, to thank him, to ask his name, to ask anything at all. He had simply touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been farewell or acknowledgement, turned on his heel, and walked out. By the time she stumbled to the door, he was already mounting a tall buckskin horse. She called out to him, her voice hoarse from disuse and fear, but he either did not hear or chose not to respond. Within moments he was riding west, and then he was gone, leaving her standing alone in front of a cabin with 2 dead men inside. The shock of it had kept her frozen for several minutes. Then survival instinct took over. She found her small traveling bag that the outlaws had tossed in a corner, took one of the outlaws' horses that was tied outside, and rode east until she found the main road. A sympathetic rancher and his wife discovered her as the sun was setting, gave her food and shelter for the night, and saw her safely to Evanston the next day. Her uncle, a portly man named George Reynolds with mutton-chop whiskers and kind eyes, had listened to her story with increasing alarm, and then pulled her into a tight embrace. He gave her a room above the general store, put her to work behind the counter, and told her to put the whole terrible ordeal behind her. The local sheriff, a man named Davies, took her statement and promised to look into the matter, but Natalie heard nothing more about it. The bodies were collected, the outlaws identified as members of a gang that had been troubling the territory, and life moved on. Except Natalie could not move on. Not entirely. She settled into life in Evanston easily enough. The town was small but growing, situated along the route of the Union Pacific Railroad that had been completed nearly a decade earlier. The railroad brought commerce and people, and her uncle's store did steady business selling everything from flour and fabric to tools and tobacco. Natalie proved to be a natural shopkeeper, pleasant with customers, quick with numbers, and organized in her work. Within months, her uncle was talking about making her a partner in the business. She made friends among the young women of the town. There was Mary Chen, whose parents ran the laundry and who had a sharp wit that made Natalie laugh. There was Elizabeth Stone, the doctor's daughter, who was training to be a teacher and loved books almost as much as Natalie did. There was Sarah Miller, who worked at the hotel and knew every bit of gossip in town before anyone else. They had tea together on Sunday afternoons, walked along the creek when the weather was pleasant, and talked about the things young women talked about: fashion, books, the few eligible men in town, dreams for the future. Natalie was courted after a fashion. There was Thomas Wright, the assistant at the bank, who had pale blue eyes and soft hands and a tendency to talk endlessly about interest rates. There was Henry Foster, who worked at the railroad office and brought her flowers twice before she gently discouraged him. There was even a visiting businessman from Cheyenne who stayed at the hotel for a week and made his interest abundantly clear, but Natalie found him pompous and insincere. None of them interested her, and she knew why, even if she could not fully admit it to herself. The cowboy haunted her thoughts. She did not know his name. She did not know where he came from or where he had gone. She did not know if he had been looking for her specifically, or if he had simply stumbled upon the cabin by chance. She did not know why he had risked his life to save hers, and more than anything, she did not know why he had said nothing, not a single word, not "Are you hurt?" or "You are safe now," or even just his name. Nothing. It made no sense. In every story she had ever read, in every tale she had ever heard, the rescuer spoke to the rescued. There were questions about welfare, assurances of safety, introductions, and often gratitude accepted with humble grace. But he had given her none of that. He had freed her and vanished like smoke, and the mystery of it consumed her thoughts in quiet moments. She replayed the scene endlessly in her mind, examining every detail. The way his hands had been steady as he cut her bonds. The careful distance he had maintained, never touching her more than necessary. The absolute silence, the tip of his hat. Had she seen sadness in those gray eyes, or was that her imagination? Had there been recognition, as if he had known who she was? Or was she just another person in need, and speaking to her would have made the encounter too personal, too real? Her uncle noticed her distraction one evening about 4 months after her arrival. They were taking inventory in the back room, counting tins of peaches and sacks of cornmeal, when he paused and looked at her with concern. "You have been far away in your thoughts lately, Natalie. Is something troubling you?" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I cannot stop thinking about the man who saved me, the cowboy." Her uncle nodded slowly. "That is understandable. He did you a great service. But I do not even know his name. I cannot thank him, and I cannot understand why he said nothing to me. Not one word, Uncle George. He cut me free and left without speaking. What kind of man does that?" Her uncle was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently smoothing the corner of a burlap sack. "Perhaps a man who has seen too much to want to talk about it. Or perhaps a man who believes actions speak louder than words. Or perhaps," and here he looked at her with sudden sharpness, "a man who knew that if he spoke to you, he might not be able to leave." The suggestion startled her. "What do you mean? You are a beautiful young woman, Natalie, and you were in distress." Some men keep their distance from situations like that precisely because they fear what might happen if they do not. A man who stops to talk, to comfort, to connect, that is a man who might feel obligated to see things through, to ensure your safety beyond that single moment. A man who rides away without a word, well, perhaps that is a man protecting both of you from complications. Natalie considered this. It was a perspective she had not entertained, and it troubled her as much as it intrigued her. That seems cold, or practical. These are hard lands, Natalie. People survive by keeping things simple. She returned to counting inventory, but the conversation stayed with her. Was it possible that the cowboy's silence had been a kindness in its own way? A clean break, a rescue without entanglement. The thought should have brought her peace, but instead it only deepened her curiosity. Who was he to have such discipline, such control over himself? And why did she care so much? Winter came to Evanston, bringing snow and bitter cold that kept most people close to their fires. Business at the store slowed, and Natalie spent long hours reading by the stove, losing herself in novels from the small lending library the town maintained. She read stories of adventure and romance, of knights and ladies, of star-crossed lovers and happy endings, and through it all the gray-eyed cowboy remained a constant presence in the back of her mind. Spring of 1879 arrived with muddy streets and the return of travelers. The store became busy again, and Natalie threw herself into work. Her uncle made good on his promise and made her a partner, giving her a small percentage of the profits and more responsibility in ordering and managing the business. She was grateful for the trust and the distraction. One afternoon in May, a rancher came into the store looking for rope and nails. He was an older man named Jack Morrison, weathered and gruff, who ran cattle on a spread north of town. As Natalie wrapped his purchases, he made casual conversation. Heard some news that might interest folks around here. That gang that was causing trouble last year, the one that killed poor Miller on the freight wagon route. Well, someone finally caught up with the last of them down in Colorado. Man named Cade Irving brought him in. Natalie's hands stilled. Cade Irving? Yep. Bounty hunter mostly. Takes on tracking work, finds people who do not want to be found. Quiet sort from what I hear. But effective. Brought in 3 members of that gang over the past year. The law is grateful, I can tell you that. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain the rancher could hear it. What does he look like, this Cade Irving? Morrison shrugged. Could not say, never met him myself. Just heard the name from Sheriff Davies. Why, you know him. I might, Natalie managed, her voice remarkably steady. I just wondered. After Morrison left, Natalie stood behind the counter, her mind racing. Cade Irving, finally a name. A bounty hunter. That explained the skill with which he had handled the outlaws, the weapons, the confidence, but it did not explain the silence. If he was tracking the gang, if he had been hunting them, then saving her had been part of his work. So why not say so? Why not ask her questions about what she had seen or heard? Why not warn her that there was still one outlaw unaccounted for? She went to see Sheriff Davies that evening. He was a solid man in his 50s who ran a tidy office and took his responsibilities seriously. He greeted Natalie with warmth and listened as she asked about Cade Irving. Ah, so you heard about that, Davies said, leaning back in his chair. Yes, Irving is the man who has been cleaning up what is left of the Fletcher gang. Brought in the last one, a man named Cobb, 2 weeks ago down in Denver. Good work, that. The territory is safer for it. Do you know where he is now? This Cade Irving? Davies shook his head. No idea. He does not stay in one place long. Works for whoever will pay him, goes where the jobs take him. Why the interest, Miss Reynolds? I believe he is the man who saved me, the one who freed me from the cabin. Recognition dawned in the sheriff's eyes. Well, that would make sense. Irving was tracking the Fletcher gang even back then. Probably found their hideout and decided to act. You were fortunate he did. I would like to thank him. Davies gave her a sympathetic look. I understand that, but I have no way to contact him. Men like Irving, they show up when they show up. If it is meant to happen, your paths will cross again. Natalie thanked him and left, feeling both satisfied and frustrated. She had a name now, which was something. Cade Irving. She turned it over in her mind, tried to match it to the silent figure in her memory. It fit somehow. Strong and simple and a little hard-edged, like the man himself. But knowing his name did not bring him any closer. And it did not answer the question that still consumed her. Why had he said nothing? The months continued to pass. Summer brought heat and dust. Then autumn brought harvest and preparation for winter. Natalie turned 22 in October, celebrated quietly with her uncle and her friends. Sarah Miller got married to a surveyor from Cheyenne, and the whole town turned out for the wedding. Elizabeth Stone accepted a teaching position at the schoolhouse. Mary Chen's family expanded their laundry business. Life moved forward as it always did, and still Natalie wondered. She told herself it was foolish. She had spent mere minutes in the man's presence, and most of that time she had been in shock and fear. She did not know him. She had no reason to think about him so often, to dream about him on restless nights, to imagine conversations they had never had and might never have. It was ridiculous to build such curiosity, such fascination, around a man who had shown no interest in her beyond ensuring her immediate safety. But the heart, she was learning, did not always listen to reason. In December of 1879, a bad storm rolled through Evanston, dumping snow for 3 days straight and leaving the town cut off from the outside world. Natalie and her uncle kept the store open for limited hours, serving the townsfolk who needed supplies, and then huddled by the fire in the evenings. On the third night, her uncle looked at her over his cup of coffee and spoke gently. "You are still thinking about him." It was not a question. Natalie did not bother to deny it. "Yes. You have been thinking about him for a year and a half, Natalie. I know. That is a long time to wonder about a man you do not know." "I know that too," her uncle sighed. "What is it you think you will find if you ever see him again? What are you hoping for?" Natalie stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I do not know. An explanation, perhaps. Or just to know that he is real, that I did not imagine the whole thing. Sometimes it feels like a dream, Uncle George. This silent cowboy who appeared and disappeared. I need to know why he said nothing. I need to understand. And if you never get that understanding, if you never see him again..." The question hung in the air. Natalie did not have an answer. "You cannot build your life around a ghost, my dear," her uncle said softly. "You are young and smart and kind. You have so much ahead of you. Do not let a mystery steal your present while you chase the past." His words were wise, and Natalie knew it. But wisdom and feeling were different countries, and she was living firmly in the latter. The new year arrived, 1880, and with it came change. The railroad announced plans to expand the depot in Evanston, which meant more workers, more people, more business. Her uncle's store thrived, and Natalie found herself busier than ever. She hired a young man named David to help with the heavy lifting and stocking, which freed her to manage the accounts and ordering. In March, a cattle ranch southwest of town advertised for a bookkeeper. They needed someone to manage their accounts, track their inventory, and handle correspondence with buyers. The pay was excellent, better than what Natalie made at the store, and it would be a new challenge. She considered applying, but her uncle looked so distressed at the thought of losing her that she dismissed the idea. Besides, Evanston was where she needed to be. Somewhere deep in her bones, she knew that. If Cade Irving ever came back through Wyoming territory, it would be through a town like this, a hub on the railroad, a place where people pass through. She was not sure when her wondering had turned into waiting, but it had. She was waiting for him, whether she admitted it or not. Spring turned to summer, and on a blazing hot day in July, 3 years almost to the day after he had freed her, Cade Irving rode back into her life. Natalie was behind the counter of the store, helping a ranch wife select fabric for a dress, when the door opened and he walked in. She knew him instantly, despite the passage of time. He was dressed much the same as before, worn trousers, a faded shirt, a leather vest, the same battered hat. His face was perhaps a bit more weathered, a few more lines around his eyes, but the gray eyes themselves were unchanged, unreadable. Storm-colored. He did not recognize her, she realized. He glanced her way briefly, politely, the way one might glance at any shopkeeper, and then moved toward the shelves where the canned goods were kept. Natalie's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear the ranch wife's question about thread. She answered automatically, her hands shaking as she cut the fabric, her eyes tracking Cade Irving's movement through the store. He selected a few items: canned beans, coffee, jerky, ammunition. Practical supplies for a man on the move. The ranch wife paid and left, and suddenly there was no one else in the store except Natalie and Cade. He approached the counter with his selections, and she forced herself to breathe normally as she began tallying the cost. "Will this be everything?" She managed, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "Yes, madam," he said, and her heart nearly stopped because those were the first words she had ever heard him speak. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel in a creek bed, and hearing it felt surreal. She wrapped his items and told him the total. He paid in coins, exact change, and their hands did not touch as he took the package from her. He was turning to leave when Natalie found her courage. "Mr. Irving." He stopped, turned back, and there was the slightest flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You know my name." "I do. You freed me from the Fletcher gang 3 years ago in a cabin west of here. You cut my bonds and left without saying a word." Recognition dawned slowly across his features, and with it came something that looked almost like regret. He studied her face carefully, and she wondered what he saw. Did he remember her terrified and bound in that dark cabin? Could he see how she had grown and changed in the 3 years since? "I remember," he said finally. "You look well. Thanks to you." He shook his head slightly. "You would have been fine. The gang was falling apart. Someone would have found you." "That is not what I believed at the time, and you cannot know what would have happened." He had no answer for that. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, and Natalie realized she was squandering her chance. She had wondered for 3 years, and here he was, and she could not let him walk away again without answers. "Why did you not speak to me that day? Why did you leave without saying anything?" Cade Irving's jaw tightened. "It was not necessary. Not necessary. You saved my life. I would have liked to know the name of my rescuer. I would have liked to thank you properly." "Thanks were not needed, but answers are. I have spent 3 years wondering about you, about that day. About why you said nothing." He looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight, his fingers tightening on the package in his hands. "I do not know what you want me to say, Miss Reynolds, Natalie Reynolds, and I want you to tell me the truth. Why the silence? What were you afraid of?" The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, something flickered in those gray eyes, something vulnerable and raw, and then it was gone, shuttered behind his usual impassive expression. "I was not afraid," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then what?" "Does it matter? It was 3 years ago. You are fine. I did what needed doing. Let it be enough." "It is not enough," Natalie said, and she was surprised by the passion in her own voice. "I have thought about you nearly every day for 3 years. I have turned down suitors because they were not you. I have stayed in this town half hoping you might pass through so I could ask you these questions. So no, it is not enough. I need to understand." Cade stared at her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in him. "You should not have thought about me. I am nobody worth thinking about." "That is for me to decide, is it not?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. Then he set his package down on the counter and removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that spoke of frustration and weariness. "You want the truth?" "I do. I said nothing because I knew if I spoke to you, if I let myself see you as a person and not just a job, I would want to stay. And I could not stay. I had the last member of the gang to find. I had work to do. I have always had work to do. Men like me, we do not get to have normal lives, Miss Reynolds. We do not get to have conversations and connections and all the things that other people take for granted. So I cut you free and I left, and I did not speak because speaking would have made it harder." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. Natalie felt her breath catch. "Harder to leave, you mean?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her feel exposed and seen in equal measure. "Because even then, terrified and bound and surrounded by death, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And because I knew that if I heard your voice, if I learned your name, if I gave you even a moment of my time, I would want more. And I had nothing to offer you but a violent life and an early grave." Natalie's heart was soaring and breaking all at once. "You never gave me a choice in the matter. I know. And I will not apologize for that. Keeping you safe meant keeping my distance. I was safe the moment you killed those men. Were you? With one gang member still out there, one who might come looking for you if he thought you could identify him. With me, a man you did not know, a man who makes his living in blood and bullets. What kind of safety is that?" "The kind that lets me choose my own risks." Cade shook his head, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. "You are stubborn. I have had 3 years to prepare this argument. I can tell." He picked up his package again. "I should go." "Where?" "North. There is work in Montana, a rustling ring that needs breaking up." "Will you come back?" He hesitated. "I do not know." Natalie made a decision in that moment, one that she had perhaps been moving toward for 3 years without realizing it. "Stay, just for tonight. Have dinner with my uncle and me. Let me thank you properly and let me know you as more than a silent ghost who has haunted my thoughts. One evening, Cade. That is all I am asking." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. "One evening." Relief and joy flooded through her. "The store closes at 6. There is a boarding house 2 streets over Mrs. Patterson's place. You can get a room there. Come back here at closing and we will go upstairs to the apartment. My uncle will want to meet you." "I am not good with people. You are doing fine so far." Another small smile. "Only because you do all the talking. Then I will continue to do so." He left then, and Natalie watched him go through the window, watched him walk down the street toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and she felt like she could barely contain the happiness bubbling up inside her. 3 years of wondering, and now she would have answers. Now she would have an evening with the man who had occupied so many of her thoughts. Her uncle returned from his errands an hour later, and found her practically vibrating with energy as she swept the already clean floor. He listened to her rapid explanation with raised eyebrows, and then laughed. "So your ghost is real after all. Well, I look forward to meeting this Cade Irving and seeing what kind of man inspires such devotion from my niece." "It is not devotion," Natalie protested. "It is curiosity." "Of course it is," her uncle said, in a tone that suggested he believed no such thing. At 6 o'clock, Natalie locked the front door of the store and turned to find Cade standing on the sidewalk outside. He had cleaned up, she noticed. His shirt looked freshly brushed, his hair was still damp from washing, and he had shaved the stubble from his jaw. He looked younger without it, and somehow more vulnerable. She let him in and led him upstairs to the small apartment above the store. Her uncle had prepared a simple but hearty meal: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie from the bakery. The three of them sat at the small table, and Natalie watched with amusement as her uncle interrogated Cade with the protective concern of a father. To his credit, Cade answered every question honestly. He spoke of growing up in Kansas, of losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, of drifting west and learning to track and hunt and survive. He spoke of falling into bounty hunting almost by accident when he tracked down a horse thief who had stolen from a ranch where he was working and discovered he had a talent for it. He spoke of the loneliness of the life, the constant movement, the danger, and the occasional satisfaction of bringing justice to those who had escaped it. He did not speak of the violence in detail, but it hung there in the gaps between his words, in the way his hands bore scars, in the watchful set of his shoulders, even in the safety of their small dining room. "You never want to settle somewhere?" her uncle asked. "Have a home, a family?" Cade glanced at Natalie before answering. "I have wanted it, but wanting and having are different things. My life does not lend itself to roots." "Lives can change," her uncle said gently, "not easily." After dinner, her uncle excused himself with transparent diplomacy, claiming tiredness and leaving Natalie and Cade alone. They moved to the small sitting area, settling into chairs near the window that overlooked the quiet street. Night had fallen, and lamplight glowed warm in the room. "Your uncle is a good man," Cade said. "He is. He took me in when I had nothing. Tell me about that, about how you came to be on that freight wagon." So Natalie told him about her father's death, about the debts that consumed the small farm in Missouri, about her uncle's letter offering her a new start. She told him about the journey west, about her hopes and fears, and about how the attack by the Fletcher gang had shattered her sense of safety in the world. "But you recovered," Cade observed. "You made a life here." "I did. Though I was never quite the same, how could I be?" "Trauma changes a person. It does. Have you been changed by the things you have seen, the things you have done?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I have done things I am not proud of, even if they were necessary. I have seen the worst of what people can do to each other. It makes it hard to trust, hard to hope. Is that why you push people away? Why you said nothing to me that day? Part of it. But I told you the other reason earlier. You would have been a complication I could not afford. And now, am I still a complication?" Cade looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "More than ever. But I am here anyway, which means I am either braver or more foolish than I was 3 years ago. I vote for braver." A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming it completely. "You do not know me well enough to make that judgment. Then stay longer than one evening. Let me know you better." The smile faded. "Natalie, I have work in Montana. I cannot just abandon it." "I am not asking you to abandon it. I am asking you to delay it. A few days, maybe a week." "Surely the rustlers can wait that long." "And what would we do with a week? Talk, walk, get to know each other. See if this thing between us, this connection I have felt for 3 years, is real or just my imagination." "It is real," Cade said quietly. "I have thought about you too. More than I should have. I told myself it was just guilt, that I was checking on you from a distance. But when I rode into town today, I was hoping I might see you." And when I walked into that store and saw you behind the counter, my first thought was that you were even more beautiful than I remembered." Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest. "Then stay. Please. Give us a chance to see what this could be." He was silent for a long time, and she could see the struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he nodded. "1 week. But after that, I have to leave. I gave my word to the ranchers in Montana, and my word is all I have in this line of work." 1 week, Natalie agreed, though she was already planning how to make it longer. The next 7 days were the happiest Natalie could remember. Cade stayed at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, but spent his days with Natalie. In the mornings, she worked at the store while he ran errands or simply sat in the corner reading old newspapers. They took lunch together every day, sometimes at the hotel dining room, sometimes on a picnic by the creek that ran east of town. In the afternoons, when the store was quiet, they talked. Natalie learned about his life in pieces, carefully offered fragments that built into a larger picture. She learned that he was 27 years old, that his birthday was in February, that his favorite meal was his mother's chicken and dumplings, a recipe he could no longer recreate. She learned that he had wanted to be a veterinarian when he was young, that he loved horses and had a gift with them, that his buckskin gelding was named Flint and had been with him for 5 years. She learned that he read when he could, that he had a battered copy of Mark Twain's stories in his saddlebag, that he played harmonica passably and chess very well. She learned that he carried guilt like a stone, that every life he had taken in his work weighed on him even when it was justified, that he sent money to the families of men he had killed if they were not purely evil, a private penance he never spoke of to anyone. She learned that he was kind in quiet ways, that he helped Mrs. Patterson fix her front step without being asked, that he gave coins to the beggar children who sometimes appeared in town, that he treated everyone with a gruff courtesy that spoke of deep-seated decency. And she learned that when he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt more seen and understood than she ever had in her life. For his part, Cade learned about Natalie. He learned that she was whip-smart and curious, that she read voraciously, and had opinions on everything from politics to poetry. He learned that she was kind but not soft, that she had a spine of steel beneath her gentle demeanor, that she could bargain with traveling salesmen until they gave her the best prices, and then turn around and donate goods to families who were struggling. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated winter, that she missed Missouri sometimes but considered Wyoming home now, that she wanted to travel someday, to see the ocean and the big cities back east. He learned that she was brave, braver than he had given her credit for. She asked him direct questions about his work, about the violence, and did not flinch from the answers. She did not romanticize what he did, but neither did she condemn him for it, and he learned, though he did not say it aloud, that he was falling in love with her. On the 5th day of his stay, they took a longer walk, following the creek several miles out of town to a spot where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water ran clear over smooth stones. They sat on the bank, and Natalie removed her shoes and stockings, dipping her feet in the cold water with a sigh of contentment. Cade watched her, and his expression was so tender that it made her breath catch. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am a fool." "Why?" "Because I am going to leave you, and it is going to hurt, and I knew better than to let this happen." Natalie pulled her feet from the water and turned to face him fully. "Then do not leave. Stay here. There is work you could do, honest work. The ranches always need hands. You could train horses, use that gift you have. You could build a life here." "I do not know how to live a normal life, Natalie. I have been moving for so long. I do not know if I can stop. You could learn. We could learn together." He reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. You deserve better than a man who only knows violence. I deserve to choose for myself. And I choose you, Cade Irving. I have chosen you every day for 3 years without even knowing if I would see you again. Now you are here, and you are everything I hoped you would be, and I am not letting you ride away without fighting for this. You are extraordinary, he said softly. I am practical. I know what I want. And what do you want? You, here, a chance for us to build something real. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that sent electricity through her entire body. It was sweet and tentative and full of longing, and when he pulled back, his eyes were shining with emotion. I want that too, he admitted. More than I have wanted anything in a very long time. Then stay. I have to go to Montana. I gave my word. Then go and come back. Finish your job and come back to me. Promise me. He hesitated, and she saw the fear in him, the belief that he did not deserve this, that something would go wrong, that men like him did not get happy endings. Promise me, Cade. I promise, he said finally. I will come back. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Cade spoke of saving money, of finding work that did not involve guns and tracking, of building a small house on a piece of land where he could raise horses. Natalie spoke of expanding the store, maybe opening a second location, of having children someday, of growing old together. It was sweet and terrifying and more real than anything she had ever imagined. On the 7th day, Cade prepared to leave. He packed his supplies, saddled Flint, and met Natalie outside the store at dawn. Her uncle stood in the doorway, watching with a knowing smile. I will be back, Cade told her, holding both her hands in his. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, however long it takes to finish the job in Montana. And then I am done with that life. I am coming back here to you, and we will build something good together. I will be waiting, Natalie said, though her heart was breaking at the thought of more weeks of separation. Write to me. I will. Every chance I get. He kissed her goodbye, a long, deep kiss that promised everything, and then he mounted Flint and rode north. Natalie watched until he disappeared from view, and then she went inside and cried for an hour before pulling herself together and getting to work. The letters started arriving 2 weeks later. They came sporadically, whenever Cade was in a town with a post office, and Natalie treasured each one. His handwriting was rough but legible, his words sparse but meaningful. He told her about Montana, about the ranchers he was working for, about the rustlers he was tracking. He told her about the landscape, the mountains that made Wyoming's hills look small, the big sky that went on forever. He told her about missing her, about counting the days until he could return. She wrote back faithfully, long letters full of news about Evanston, about the store, about her friends and her uncle and the small details of her daily life. She told him about her hopes and her fears, about how she was preparing for his return, about how she loved him. It was the first time she had written those words, and she hesitated before sealing the letter, wondering if it was too much, too soon. But it was the truth, and she had promised herself she would always be honest with him. His next letter, 3 weeks later, included a single line that made her weep with joy. I love you too, Natalie Reynolds, more than I have words to say. 8 weeks after he left, a telegram arrived at the post office. Natalie's hands shook as she opened it, fearing the worst, but the message was simple. Job finished. Coming home. Arriving September 15th. Cade. September 15th was 6 days away. Natalie spent those days in a flurry of preparation. She cleaned the apartment until it sparkled, bought fabric for new curtains, helped her uncle reorganize the store. She had her hair done, bought a new dress, and drove her friends crazy talking about Cade's return. You are worse than a schoolgirl, Sarah teased, but her smile was warm. "I am happy for you, Natalie. You deserve this." On the morning of September 15th, Natalie woke before dawn and dressed with care. She went downstairs to the store, too restless to sit still, and reorganized the entire front window display. Her uncle found her there at 7 in the morning and laughed. "He will not be here until this afternoon at the earliest, my dear. The train from Montana does not arrive until 3. I know. I just need something to do with my hands." At 2:30, Natalie closed the store, ignoring her uncle's amused protests, and walked to the train station. A small crowd had gathered, people waiting for arriving passengers or preparing to depart. Natalie stood on the platform, her heart pounding, as the train's whistle sounded in the distance. The locomotive pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and a screech of brakes. Passengers began disembarking, and Natalie scanned each face desperately. Then she saw him, stepping down from the third car, his hat in his hands, his eyes searching the crowd. She did not remember moving, but suddenly she was running, her skirts held high, propriety abandoned. Cade saw her and dropped his bag, opening his arms just in time to catch her as she launched herself at him. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, and she was laughing and crying all at once. "You came back," she said, even though she had known he would. "I promised," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "And I am never leaving again." He kissed her there on the platform in front of everyone, and Natalie did not care who saw. She had waited 3 years to understand the mystery of his silence, and now she had so much more than answers. She had him, whole and real and hers. That evening, Cade asked her uncle for permission to court Natalie formally, a question that made George Reynolds laugh because the courtship had clearly been happening for months already. But he gave his blessing gladly, and he opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted to the future. Over the next weeks, Cade made good on his promises. He found work at a ranch outside town, using his skills with horses to break and train the wild mustangs that the ranchers caught. He was good at it, patient and firm and understanding of the animals in a way that impressed everyone who watched him work. He earned good money and began saving toward the small house he had promised Natalie. They courted properly, though there was nothing traditional about their relationship. They had picnics and attended church socials and went to dances at the town hall. Cade was awkward at social events, uncomfortable with small talk and crowds, but he tried for Natalie's sake, and she loved him all the more for it. He met her friends and charmed them without trying. Mary Chen declared him strong and silent in the best way. Elizabeth Stone appreciated his intelligence and the way he listened when she talked about her teaching. Even Sarah, who was suspicious of any man who came into Natalie's life, admitted that Cade seemed genuine. In November, 3 months after his return, Cade asked Natalie to marry him. They were at their spot by the creek, the cottonwoods bare of leaves but still beautiful in the late autumn light. He presented her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, the only thing of value he had carried with him through all his wandering years. "It is not much," he said, "but it is honest, like me, like what I am offering you, a simple life but an honest one with all my heart." "Yes," Natalie said before he could even finish. "Yes, Cade, 1,000 times yes." They were married in December, in the small church in Evanston, with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore a dress of white lace that her friends had helped her sew, and Cade wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but distinguished. Her uncle walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when Cade took her hands and promised to love and cherish her all his days, Natalie believed him with every fiber of her being. Their wedding night was spent in a room at the hotel, a luxury that Cade had insisted on. He was gentle with her, patient and tender, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Natalie felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was the man who had saved her life, who had haunted her thoughts, who had come back to her against all odds. And now he was hers, fully and completely. They moved into a small house that Cade had been building on a piece of land he purchased north of town. It was modest but well made, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a sitting room with a large fireplace. There was a barn for horses and enough land for Cade to start his own training business. Natalie continued to work at her uncle's store, and together she and Cade built a life that was peaceful and full of love. They had their struggles, as all couples did. Cade still had nightmares sometimes, dark dreams of his violent past that left him shaking and distant. Natalie learned to hold him through those nights, to ground him in the present, to remind him that he was safe and loved. And Natalie had her own moments of doubt, times when the memory of those 2 days in the cabin came back to haunt her, when she woke in a panic thinking she was bound and helpless. Cade learned to soothe her through those episodes, to speak softly and hold her carefully until the fear passed. But the hard moments were far outnumbered by the good ones. There were quiet evenings by the fire, reading together or playing chess. There were Sunday dinners with her uncle, who treated Cade like the son he had never had. There were long rides across the Wyoming landscape, just the 2 of them and the endless sky. There were silly arguments about whether to paint the kitchen blue or yellow, about whose turn it was to fetch water, about how many horses was too many horses. In the spring of 1881, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Cade one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of wonder and joy on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. "A baby," he said, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. We are. Are you frightened, terrified, but also happier than I have ever been?" Their daughter was born in December, almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. They named her Clara, after Cade's mother, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. Cade was a devoted father, gentle and protective and endlessly patient. Natalie watched him cradle their tiny daughter and marveled at how far he had come from the silent cowboy, who had freed her from that cabin 4.5 years ago. 2 years later, they had a son, whom they named George after Natalie's uncle. He was a boisterous child, loud and energetic, the opposite of his serious father. But Cade adored him, and the 2 of them spent hours in the barn, the little boy trailing after his father as Cade worked with the horses. Life settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Cade's horse training business thrived, and Natalie eventually stepped back from the store to focus on their growing family. They added rooms to the house as needed, built a larger barn, acquired more land. They became pillars of the Evanston community, known and respected. But through it all, Natalie never forgot the mystery that had consumed her for 3 years and the answer that had changed her life. Sometimes, when she and Cade were alone, she would ask him about it. "You ever regret it?" saying nothing that day, and Cade would shake his head. "No. Because if I had spoken to you then, I might have said the wrong thing. I might have scared you, or made promises I could not keep, or worse. The silence gave us both time to become who we needed to be for each other. You needed to heal and grow strong. I needed to finish my old life and learn how to start a new one. The silence was not a mistake. It was preparation. That is very philosophical for a cowboy. I have had a lot of time to think about it, and you have asked me this question at least 100 times. Because I still find it fascinating. You are strange, Natalie Irving, and you love me for it. I do, more than anything in this world. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cade surprised Natalie with a trip to Denver. They left the children with her uncle and took the train to the city, where they stayed in a fancy hotel and ate at fine restaurants and went to the theater. It was glamorous and exciting, but Natalie found herself missing their simple life in Evanston. "I think I am not built for city life," she told Cade as they rode the train home. "Too much noise, too many people." "I agree. Give me open sky and honest work any day, and me. Do I count as honest work?" He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You, my love, are the best work I have ever done, and the only work that truly matters." As the years passed, their love deepened and matured. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, economic downturns and personal losses. Her Uncle George passed away in 1889, leaving the store to Natalie in his will. She sold it to a young couple who promised to keep it running, and used the money to expand Cade's horse business into one of the most successful in the territory. Clara grew into a serious, intelligent young woman who wanted to be a doctor, a dream that Natalie and Cade supported wholeheartedly. They sent her to medical school in Chicago, a decision that was not popular with some of their more traditional neighbors, but one they never regretted. George the Younger followed his father's footsteps, developing the same gift with horses and the same quiet strength. He took over the family business when Cade's joints started to ache too much for the hard physical work, and he ran it with the same integrity his father had. They had 2 more children over the years, daughters named Sarah and Emma, who filled their house with laughter and chaos. Their home was always full of life, of children and grandchildren, of friends and neighbors who stopped by for advice or assistance or simply company. But Natalie's favorite moments were still the quiet ones, just her and Cade, sitting on their porch as the sun set over the Wyoming hills they both loved. In those moments, she would sometimes think back to the terrified girl she had been, bound in a dark cabin, and the silent cowboy who had freed her. "What are you thinking about?" Cade would ask, because even after decades of marriage he could read her like a book. "About how lucky I am. About how a single moment changed everything. I think about that too, about what would have happened if I had ridden past that cabin, or if you had given up on me during those 3 years. I could never have given up on you. Even when you were just a mystery, you were mine." "That makes no sense." "Love rarely does." He would laugh then, that rare, genuine laugh that she had worked years to coax out of him, and pull her close, and Natalie would rest her head on his shoulder and feel complete. In the summer of 1903, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that their children insisted on throwing. The whole town turned out, a testament to the life they had built together. There were speeches and toasts and dancing, and Cade tolerated it all with good grace because he knew it made Natalie happy. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down, he pulled her onto the dance floor one last time. The band played a slow waltz, and they moved together with the ease of long practice. 25 years, Natalie said. "Can you believe it?" "Barely. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into your uncle's store. Other times it feels like I have known you my whole life." "Which do you prefer?" "Both, all of it. Every moment with you has been a gift, Natalie, even the hard ones. Even when I nag you about leaving your boots on the porch, especially then." She laughed and kissed him, not caring that people were watching. At 51 and 55, respectively, they were long past the point of worrying about propriety. As they swayed to the music, Natalie thought about the question she had carried for 3 years, the mystery that had shaped her young adult life. Why had he said nothing? She knew the answer now, had known it for decades, but understanding it still filled her with wonder. He had said nothing because words would have bound them before either was ready, would have forced a connection before it could grow naturally, would have made promises that neither could keep. The silence had been a gift, though she had not recognized it at the time. It had given her space to heal, to grow strong, to build a life and an identity separate from her trauma. It had given him time to finish his old life and find the courage to start a new one. And when they finally came together, they had done so as whole people, ready to build something real and lasting. She had spent 3 good years wondering about him, and those years had not been wasted. They had been preparation, foundation, the beginning of a love story that would span decades. "I love you, Cade Irving," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too, Natalie Irving. Always have from the first moment I saw you, always will until my last breath." The music ended, but they kept dancing, held in each other's arms, surrounded by the life and the love they had built together. Outside, the Wyoming stars blazed in the dark sky, constant and true, just like the bond between them. Years continued to pass in their gentle, inevitable way. Clara returned from medical school and opened a practice in Cheyenne, becoming one of the first female doctors in Wyoming. She married a fellow physician and gave Natalie and Cade 3 grandchildren. George married a rancher's daughter and expanded the horse business even further, breeding some of the finest stock in the territory. Sarah became a teacher like Elizabeth Stone before her, and Emma shocked everyone by running off to join a traveling theater company before eventually settling down with a newspaperman in Denver. Through it all, Natalie and Cade remained each other's constant. They grew old together with grace, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. They took walks instead of rides, sat by the fire instead of working dawn to dusk, but they were never happier than when they were together. On a spring morning in 1912, Cade woke to find Natalie already up, sitting in her rocking chair by the bedroom window, watching the sunrise. He joined her, settling into the chair beside hers that he had built specifically for this purpose. "Beautiful morning," he said, taking her hand. "They all are when I am with you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the land they loved. Natalie was 60 years old now, Cade 64, and they had lived more life than many people ever dreamed of. They had built a family, a business, a legacy of love and integrity that would outlive them both. "You remember the first thing I ever said to you?" Natalie asked suddenly. Cade smiled. "You said Mr. Irving in that store 3 years after I freed you. Your voice was shaking and you were so brave. And do you remember what you said to me the day you freed me? The very first time we were in the same space. Nothing. I said nothing. And that nothing changed my entire life. Funny how that works." "Not nothing," Cade corrected gently. "Just not words. I said everything I needed to say with my actions. I said you matter. I said you are worth saving. I said you deserve to be free. You did say all that, and eventually you said so much more." "I did. And I have never regretted a single word I have spoken to you, or a single moment of silence we have shared." Natalie squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that was still there even as their bodies aged. "I spent 3 good years wondering about you, Cade Irving. And I have spent 30 more being grateful that you came back to me. Best decision I ever made." They sat together until the sun was fully risen, 2 old people who had loved each other through decades and would continue to do so for whatever time they had left. The silence between them was comfortable now, full of everything they needed to say and everything they already knew. In the distance, their grandchildren were arriving for Sunday dinner, as they did every week. The house would soon be full of noise and laughter, of questions and stories, of the beautiful chaos of family. But for now it was just Natalie and Cade, just like it had been in that cabin all those years ago when a cowboy asked her nothing after freeing her, and she spent 3 good years wondering why. She had her answers now. She had her life, her love, her happily ever after. And it was more than she could have ever imagined on that terrifying day when a silent stranger cut her bonds and rode away. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with words, but with actions. Not with promises, but with choices. Not with knowing everything, but with the courage to wonder, to wait, to hope. Natalie Reynolds Irving had learned that lesson well, and she had lived it even better. And as she sat beside her husband in the growing morning light, surrounded by the life they had built together, she knew that every moment of wondering had been worth it. Every single moment. The end came peacefully for both of them, as these things sometimes do for couples who are deeply in tune with each other. Cade passed first, in his sleep on a cold January night in 1918, just days before his 71st birthday. Natalie held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering that she loved him and would see him again soon. She followed him 6 months later, in the same bed they had shared for nearly 40 years. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, but her last words were for Cade, spoken to a presence only she could see. "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They were buried side by side in the Evanston Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Cade and Natalie Irving. Together in silence, together in love, together forever." Their children made sure the horse ranch continued, honoring their father's legacy. Their grandchildren told stories about the silent cowboy and the woman who never stopped wondering, keeping the love story alive for generations to come. And in Evanston, Wyoming, where the railroad still ran, and the town had grown from a small outpost to a thriving community, people remembered the Irvings as proof that true love existed, that patience was rewarded, and that sometimes the best things in life were worth wondering about, worth waiting for, worth fighting to keep. Natalie had spent 3 good years wondering why the cowboy who saved her had said nothing. She had spent 37 more years being grateful for the silence that had brought them together at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.